Mali has been suspended again from the African Union following the country's second military coup in 9 months. This decision comes after the Economic Community of West African States also issues a suspension. Now, the AU urged the military to return to the barracks and stop any further political interference in the West African country, warning that if power was not handed to civilian transitional leaders, the council would impose targeted sanctions as part of its punitive measure. President Colonel Assimi Goïta seized power by forcing the resignations of the former head and prime minister, a move regional bloc leaders condemned.
Excuse me. Well, for more on this, let's turn to Ambassador Keshi, a former Nigerian diplomat, to throw more light on this particular issue. Glad to have you join us.
Thank you for having me.
Just like my colleague read there a while ago, 2 suspensions in, I think, 9 months, in a space of 9 months. What sense do you make of what is really happening in Mali?
Well, I guess we should sympathize actually with the ECOWAS leaders and the AU authorities, because when people stage coups, their intention actually is to take over government and rule the country. And in the case of the current military leader, this is the second time. The first time the same deal was made, and he became the vice president. And what triggered all this current crisis was the fact that he said he was not consulted. You can imagine the arrogance,
the effrontery,
the effrontery, to say that he was not, because he was not consulted, the prime minister and the president did not consult him enough. Therefore, he decided to stage a coup. But you know, this is very common when a coup leader takes over and is sent back to the barracks or is relegated. History is replete with a number of occasions where such persons have actually returned and taken over power. But I think the challenge is that there's very little option for ECOWAS leaders or for AU authorities, other than to say that we will impose sanctions. But they're giving him a leeway to see whether the election slated for early next year would take place. But I have my doubts if that election would take place. If it does take place, chances are that the same gentleman is going to run to be the president of the country.
Of course, it's just been named prime minister today, only today. As a matter of fact, the point is being made that the AU is being soft on Mali, but hard on Chad. I mean, considering the fact that the coup happened.
No, the AU was not actually.
That's what people.
No, the AU was not hard on Chad. The AU was soft on Chad. They allowed the Chadians to have their way. That's not being hard. They allowed them to, you know, the coup leaders to take over power. That's not being hard. That's being soft. Okay. But I think the problem is that Chad would appear to be strategic to the security of that region. And I think this is why they were rational in their thinking and then looking at the crisis as against, Mali.
Okay, so what do you make of what has been called by the AU? Because, of course, ECOWAS actually was invited to the ECOWAS meeting.
Yes.
In Ghana.
And then they suspended him. And then AU follows suit and suspended him again. But then they're saying they're going to target military targets in terms of sanctions. Do you think this will scratch him? How far do you think this can go to either convince him to change his paradigm or whatever?
It depends. Look, you got to take into account coup leaders' ambition. He doesn't give a damn whether you impose sanctions or not. They'll find a way to survive the sanctions anyway. If you go back to a country like Myanmar, they had sanctions for over 10 or 15 years. They survived. They returned back to barracks and they are back again. So it actually depends. But I think what AU and ECOWAS should have done maybe would have been to work with the international community to stifle the regime in a way and manner that they will feel the impact and then decide that, okay, look, this is madness. We need to return, you know. But as long as
which way and manner would you think we'll be able to stifle him in such a way?
No, if you impose biting sanctions that really affect the country, not just soft sanctions, you know. In fact, I don't even know what sanctions they will impose on Mali that will be so effective. But if the international community, in a concert manner, decide to impose some measure of sanctions that will really affect the economy, that's the whole idea.
Those sanctions are usually counterproductive because, I mean, for a country that
not for poor countries like Mali, but countries that have look, you know, sanctions do actually work.
If you go back, the poor people who are the receiving end of it.
Well, it depends on what you want to achieve. That is true. That is true. But the fact still remains that would also force the regime to be rational and to decide to do the right thing.
But what do you think is the way forward for a volatile Sahel region already? You have the situation going on in Chad and then, of course, Mali. Despite the peace agreement in 2015 and, of course, you know, the presence of 14,000 or so UN troops on ground, they've not been able to push back these developments.
We have to go to the root of the problems and begin to find a way to address the problems.
What's the root of the problem?
Well, look, there are so many. It also includes the economic, issues, include the lack of, fairness, justice in the political, system. When governments begin to address these issues, but more especially the economic issues that create well-being for the people, you probably see that some of these security issues will be drastically reduced.
Yeah, before we let you go, let me just step in there briefly. I am thinking while you were talking, how do we get to keep the military, the khaki boys, let me call them
in the barracks,
all over Africa, and get to stop them having incursions into democratically elected governments in Africa?
Number one, increase people's participation. Make sure elections are fair and credible. Number two, grow the economy. Because you see today all over the region, or most parts of the region, if you go back to the 60s and the 70s, when coups were prevalent, the same conditions exist today. We're actually lucky that we are not having, the whole thing has not snowballed. And I think this is why African leaders all are coming together to say, look, we must try and nip these things in the bud here and there. But at the end of the day, it's just increase people's participation, run an efficient and credible government, be fair, just and equitable. And when you bring in people and everybody and make them feel part of the country, military coup will probably be less attractive.
That's our hope.
Thank you very much,
Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Thank you all for having me. Thank you
for joining us.